All right, Paleo Hackers, welcome back. Another episode of the Paleo Hacks video podcast. This is number 12 we've done on the video format. So if you're still listening on audio, head on over to YouTube, just punch in our name and you'll find us. With me on the other end, right there, is the Paleo Mom, Sarah Ballantyne, New York Times best-selling author of the Paleo Approach, and she also has the Paleo Approach podcast. Sarah, are you paleo? I can't tell.
Am I paleo?
Yeah, I can't tell. Do you have something to do with it?
I don't know. I might really like this new diet thing that everybody's talking about.
Yeah.
They're calling it a fad, but I don't think it's a fad. I think it's here to stay.
Jump on the bandwagon. Yeah. It's okay.
Right. Yeah, no, I really need to think about the branding and marketing there, right?
Yeah, that's what I did with the Seahawks in Seattle. I don't even like football. I just jumped on it. So cool. One thing I like about you is that I was, stalking all my guests before the show, like I always do. And I was going through, and you have a really credible science background, which I think is very important. You had a medical degree, correct?
Yeah, so I have a PhD in medical biophysics. So it's different than being a doctor. It's a research stream. And what medical biophysics is it's this interdisciplinary field. It's all medical applications, but it uses basic biology, physiology, molecular biology, cellular biology, and then it also incorporates, basic physics. And where I was in that research stream was more on the biology end, where the physics was more in the tools that we were using to answer basic biology questions. I actually had a bachelor's degree in physics and kind of went more and more biology, basic biology, as I continued my education. So by the time I was finishing my second postdoctoral research fellowship, I was doing completely basic cellular biology. I identified and characterized a new cancer suppressor gene. So it went from the physics was the cool microscopes we used all the way to, wow, now I'm really understanding what's happening inside an epithelial cell.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
It's cool. It's a really neat background.
One of the smallest levels, for sure. And so when people are kind of talking in the paleo community, we like to talk, whether it be in generalizations, calling things just toxins and label it and then throw it away, or detox, it's just like these catch-all terms, or fats and, good or bad. I mean, it must kind of, in a way, drive you a little crazy when you have such a deep understanding of what's going on at the cellular level. So how does that work into kind of what you do? I mean, are you constantly snuffing through information and
yes.
and getting fed up with the paleo bro science?
No, so I think that for me, scientific literacy is such a huge passion. It's been a passion for me long before I hit paleo, and I didn't even realize until I had been blogging for probably about 6 months that it was, being part of the paleo movement was an opportunity to address scientific literacy from a public health perspective. So I like that the paleo diet is rooted in science, and I like that the science is something that we talk about in the community. But at the same time, as the community grows and we start to, pull in a lot of other sort of alternative health communities, what I'm starting to see, especially in the last year, is more anti-science sentiment. So more, correlation does not equal causation, right? It's our biggest catch-all phrase for, I'm going to ignore that scientific research because it says something contrary to what I believe. And I'm just going to say, that research was done in animals, or that research had a small sample size, or that research, was an epidemiological study. We've got all these ways of just ignoring important information and important data. And that doesn't mean that these studies that we're shoving to the side are going to completely, change the way we want to eat. But what it does mean is that that we're ignoring pieces of the puzzle, right? So each one of these things contributes to what we know on the whole, and we need to take everything with a grain of salt, but we need to consider the entire body of research.
Sure.
And so for me, I'm trying to increase the base scientific knowledge so that we can start talking about the merits of those papers, what they tell us, what they don't tell us, and really bring that overall conversation within the community to a much higher level and a much more, for me, I think, balanced, right? So we're not, trying to steer clear. If we want this to actually be not a fad diet anymore, we need to steer clear from that cult aspect of this is the way to go, this is the only great thing, these are the rules, right? And we need to start going, okay, well, look, there's individuality, there's some gray area foods worth experimenting with, there's some things we don't know. right? It's a big picture. There's a lot of inputs into health that go beyond diet, and start really looking at everything that the scientific literature can tell us, rather than just these bits and pieces that fit with our preformed narrative.
Couple things. First one, I agree. I think there's a lot of confirmation bias that goes on, especially when you can, with the internet now, you can cherry pick your own reality. So whatever you want to believe, you can find. You can find
100 websites that support that.
Yeah, whatever conspiracy rabbit hole you go down. I mean, you can research it to death until you're convinced it's number one, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And so I think the same thing applies in the health community, in paleo, whatever cult diet you're going to subscribe to, veganism, raw food, whatever. You can just research it to death and be really closed off to other information, and then just have that confirmation bias because everyone around you is also agreeing and saying, yes, it's the best, it's the best, it's the best.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do within this community is have this broader conversation where we talk about, what is it about, say, plant-based diets that have so much science to support their health benefits? And does paleo include those aspects? I mean, it does, right? Like, we are focused on, vegetables is a really, really important part of our diet. And that's one of the key mechanisms behind why plant-based diet can be effective, right? Plant-based diet really focuses on omega-3s. Well, we do that in the paleo community. So let's talk about similarities, and let's hone in on not a set of rules, but a template, right? And where you give, new people coming into this community this full range of information. So you go, here's your starting place. Here's where you get to experiment. And here's a suggested protocol for getting to this place that we're all trying to find, right? We're trying to find that space between what is optimal for our bodies, what our bodies need to be optimally healthy, and what our bodies tolerate. Right? And what we can actually get away with in terms of our diet. And we're trying to live somewhere in between, because somewhere in between is where we get to be healthy and also have that, like, food is delicious. We like to celebrate with food. We want to go on holiday and, have a margarita from time to time, like finding that balance where food is still celebratory and it's still a quality of life aspect, but it's not making us sick anymore. And so we need a really comprehensive set of tools. We can't distill this way of eating to, you eat this, you don't eat this, you eat this, you don't eat this. This is right. Like, if we want to measure everything, then you're starting to talk about a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think it's pretty accepted within this community, especially when you look at the diversity or the shades of paleo, right? Like, we start to look at how diverse this community is getting. I think one of the things we're all saying is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but how to communicate that to new people coming in. It's getting harder and harder because of, I think, a lack of central messaging, and also a inadequacy in terms of explaining the science.
50 Shades of Paleo.
50 Shades of Paleo, yeah.
That was in my head for a while, the whole time you were talking.
It would be an excellent book title.
It would. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
it would sell.
Someone should jump on that.
Yeah, I bet 3 people just did it. 3 people just copyrighted that. Yeah.
Well, I took it out of the interview because that's my book title now. No, I have no desire to write a book. I'm a terrible author. So another thing I want to touch on there, we were talking about catch-all terms and correlation, causation, and then kind of all that stuff. But another one I hear is paralysis by analysis. And I think that's a very true phrase. It floats out there. Everyone says it basically describes the person we were just talking about, of where they have to research it to death and they have to find all these studies and bring them all together. And by doing so, they don't really take action on stuff, or it's overwhelming, or they're the perfectionist and they have to do everything right. And so do you find that a lot with people you work with? Is that one of the, because personally, I think that's one of the major step ups, even for myself, is like the need to do everything right and to know everything before we even take action on something.
So for me, I think of that as paleo perfectionism or orthorexia, where you take it to an eating disorder level. For me, fun fact, I researched everything I could get my hands on the internet for free because I didn't want to buy a book for 3 months before I committed to trying paleo. And then I ripped off the Band-Aid and jumped in. I'm actually just coming up to my 4-year paleo anniversary. But I was the type of person who really needed to know the science behind the diet so that I could be motivated to make the hard choices day to day. So I think there's two ends to this spectrum. There's the getting the education so that you understand the cellular and molecular consequences of your choices to keep you motivated. And I know a lot of people who really need to know the science behind why one food would be better than another food in order to really motivate those choices. But then there's the other side of constantly preparing. And then that sort of like, I have to be perfect or I'm nothing. And I see that a lot. So I see, right, in how you identify yourself, right? So we're talking about, you hear a lot, I am paleo, rather than I follow a paleo lifestyle or I eat a paleo diet. So it's becoming a label that we attach to ourselves. And we can talk about, as a sort of psychological perspective, like whether or not that's a good thing to be like owning this label in this regard. But what happens is I was at a restaurant and the waitress was like, asking me questions about my choices. And I said, well, I follow a paleo diet. And she said, oh yeah, I tried that, but I eat rice once in a while, so I guess I'm not paleo. And I just kind of wanted to say, like, no, like it's if you're making those choices the majority of the time, if that's your template, if your body handles rice, right, if you're right lacto paleo or primal or whatever you want to call, paleo plus dairy, right? There's again shades of paleo. That doesn't exclude you from being able to say you follow a paleo diet. And so what you get is these like on the bandwagon, off the bandwagon, right? Yeah. So this, it's sort of like death by perfection. So these people who feel like when they cheat once, and maybe they're cheating and it's like a pizza and a gallon of ice cream cheating, right? Not what we would normally consider like a, emotionally stable, healthy treat. Like it's more the food addiction. They went for it. And I mean, no judgment. Some people can go for it and they get right back on the bandwagon and they feel great and it doesn't negatively impact their health. But for some people, it just sort of derails, right? And it's like, oh, okay, well, since I had pizza yesterday, I guess it doesn't matter if I have a bagel for breakfast today. And then they kind of have to do
cheat meal turns into cheat week.
Turns into cheat month, turns into 30-day challenge. And go right back to super, super rigid.
Lots of guilt and shame, too, because they didn't do it perfectly.
Right. And I think the point of this diet is not to feel deprived. It's not to create, a cycle of, binge and purge, on the broader scale. It's not to, go on it to lose 10 pounds to look great for a wedding and then fall off the bandwagon for 3 months, right? The goal is sustainability. And that's not just like environmental and ecological sustainability. That's self-sustainability, right? I can make these healthy choices as often as possible for the rest of my life. And so it means getting away from that diet mentality, which means getting away from the perfectionism and the over-obsession with food choices, right? And getting away from the judgment, self-judgment, judgment of others, getting away from like, oh my gosh, you had real birthday cake at a birthday party. Therefore, you can't call yourself paleo. And right, there's so much negativity. And we kind of just all need to like, just look at what's on our own plate and not worry about what our neighbor's doing.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, right, think about it more in terms of long-term health, right? It was in Lauren Cordain's initial paleo diet book to have this 80-20 rule. And the idea that if you followed paleo 80% of the time, you could enjoy 100% of the benefits. And yet we still have this perfectionism mentality where you have to be 100%. And certainly, right, there's also the aspect of food sensitivities and intolerances and where those fit into your 20%, or whether your 20% is going to be 10%, or if your 10% is going to be 5%. And that's something for each one of us to work out for ourselves. But I think it's really, really important to think about it from a sort of long-term perspective. Like, how are you going to be able to commit to a version, a shade of paleo for the rest of your life? And does that mean that you occasionally make paleo muffins? Great, no judgment. Does that mean that you're going to include rice from time to time? Great, no judgment. Does that mean you're going to go out for Mexican food once a week? Great, no judgment. Whatever it is that works for you, that makes you healthier, but then also is sustainable and makes this something that you can stick to. And that's going to be a different solution for everyone. And it might be a moving target, right?
Sure. And Personal question. I know being in the health community and talking about these ideas and talking about paleo and holding yourself accountable and exercising and sunlight, the list goes on. And we do these shows and we talk to experts about this stuff and we have blogs and we write about this stuff. So I think, I was talking to my friend Josh about this, within the paleo community or within the health community, the people talking about it hold themselves to a really high standard. And that can get really stressful. And I've seen a lot of people in the health community who write about the stuff, who do the research, totally crack. And they have some of the worst hidden addictions out of anyone out there. I mean, there's some of the most mentally unhealthy relationships with food out of anyone. And I see that time and time again off camera, off audio when we're talking and just totally radically honest. And so, I mean, do you relate to that at all? Do you get really stressed out when you're,
So absolutely. So I came from a history of obesity and binge eating disorder. And so I still struggle with the food addiction piece. I still have a really hard time with portion control, especially when I'm stressed or fatigued. So my default is to eat until I can't fit another bite, like to eat until I feel a little bit like throwing up, right? Like that's my default. That's what my body thinks it should be doing every time I eat. So I have to be really mindful about portion control. Mm-hmm. And then I still struggle with sugar cravings, and it's completely psychological. So I can be super, super clean for months and be completely over the physiological need for sugar. And I'm still having emotional. So I'm stressed. And that, it used to be my comfort. It used to be my best friend. It used to be what kept me company. It used to be, my shoulder to cry on was, Ben and Jerry's. So, or Oreo cookies. Like a box at a time. And so I still struggle with that food addiction piece. It's a lot better than it used to be. But what happens for me is when I get tired, so if I'm staying up late to work, which happens, when I'm working on books or I have a big project, when my stress level's high, also happens when I'm working on books or have a big project, then that, right. And we know from the scientific literature that stress and lack of sleep create less inhibited eating patterns and increased appetite. And I feel that I'm super, super sensitive to that.
100%.
So for me, I'll slide, and it's still within this like paleo template. But for me, sliding would be like, coconut milk ice cream with, dark chocolate melted on top with some banana, right? Like that would still fit as like a paleo treat, but it's more sugar than my body can handle. And it's not good to do that 7 days in a row, for example. And so for me, I've learned that I do best when I'm not eating those things. When I eat them, it's a slippery slope. And the number one thing that I have to do to get back on track is sleep. And when I get enough sleep, suddenly I don't want those foods anymore. So for me, it's been interesting because I felt like I had everything down. And then I wrote 2 books in the same year. And then it felt like everything fell apart. And it was really like stress and lack of sleep were the root behind that. But it goes with, for me, right, a sugar addiction and sliding that way. And I've been really open with the fact that I struggle with this when my stress and my sleep's really high. And then I have to keep, for me, it's the number one focus has to be on these lifestyle factors, because then the food part's easy.
Sure. And I mean, great distinction between psychological eating and physical eating, like I've felt that physical candida overgrowth, disrupted, dysbiosis, like microbiome just screaming for sugar. And that's a totally different feeling than eating because you're stressed or tired.
Very different feeling. Very, very different. And I can be in that super clean, super healthy, very, very active. And then as soon as I'm stressed, right, my brain knows that sugar is comforting. And it's always sugar. Some people have like high fat food, or fat and salty cravings. For me, it's always sugar cravings. And that's just the way that my neurotransmitters in my food addiction center are actually telling me what to do. For me, the biggest change over being, close to 300 pounds and eating, I guess, a standard American diet, a lot of Kentucky Fried Chicken and stuffed cheese crust pizzas. The biggest difference between then and now for me is when things do start to slide, they still, right, I've got these lines I don't cross because of food sensitivities, and it doesn't slide very far. So rather than things starting to slide and it just spirals into months and months of overeating, I'll have 2 days or 3 days, and then I go, oh, I'm not feeling well. I'll get, joint pain. I won't be sleeping well. I'll be achy. And those are all symptoms that relate to the fact that my autoimmune disease will start to flare when I let my eating slide, and then I'll get right back on track.
Sure.
So the biggest difference is sort of like how bad it gets, and then how quickly I like tighten everything up. And then it happens less frequently. So, there was times in my life where it was pretty much, I'd fall into that slide. I'd spend 2 weeks doing really, really good, clean, low carb eating. And then I would fall into 2 months of, rebound, eat whatever I want. And then I'd clean myself up for 3 weeks, and then it'd be 3 months off. Whereas now it's 2 or 3 days, maybe a month that it sort of slides and I'm eating more sugar. The women out there can probably relate, and then pull myself back. And, but it's not, I don't find it effortless. So I love the food I'm eating. I find the choices of food effortless, but I find that the mindfulness when it comes to portion control, and the mindfulness when it comes to avoiding, even like 85% dark chocolate, like I do better if I'm not eating that stuff. And so being really mindful about those types of treats. It's for that reason that when people are starting this diet, it's so overwhelming. It can be really overwhelming depending on where you come from. Like I can totally relate because it's still not easy. And I like to tell people there's a learning curve, but it still requires commitment, right? It still requires dedication. Hopefully not self-deprivation, hopefully not, feeling like you're missing out, but it still requires this level of commitment to stick with it.
Yeah. It really is. It's like learning anything. It's like a language, how would it be if day one learning Spanish, you just got dropped in the middle of Tijuana? Like how would you do? You probably wouldn't do too well, but then you gradually start picking it up, learning a few words. Okay, this, and slowly start to like find people who can show you things and find resources and people who have a similar style to you that you like and relate to. And then you slowly build your knowledge base of words and vocabulary. And then, depends how fast you want to do it, but you can get fluent in Spanish fairly quickly if you immerse yourself in it. And so I think
that's a great analogy.
Food is very immersive, and you're doing it 3 times a day, 4 times a day, 5 times a day, and you got to immerse yourself with people whose approaches you like, and you go for it. You learn from there. That's
like the most phenomenal analogy. I'm gonna use that if that's okay.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
And I think that it can be like that's where you can see like the person who's doing a paleo diet in a family that doesn't want to do it, why it's so much harder for them, right? Because they're living in a household where they don't have the support, and other people are eating these like uber palatable foods in front of them that are super, super tempting. And that's where you can understand that person's struggles are so like extreme compared to the person who, lives by themselves, or their entire family wants to go on board and they're all going to do it. Maybe they've got friends that are paleo. And that's where online communities are so important, because they can replace that support when you don't have it in your sort of day-to-day physical life.
Yeah, surrounding yourself. So to touch real quick on some more like scientific stuff for the people out there, and they're gung-ho and they want to immerse themselves in the research and the science. What is going on? Let's just dive into it. I know you're familiar with autoimmune diseases. That's a humongous area for people. There's no great segue to that, so I just want to ask you flat out, kind of what is an autoimmune disease? Set it up for the person at home who's ready to learn about the autoimmune disease science.
So the immune system is the part of our bodies that is supposed to defend us from a foreign invader. So that foreign invader could be a virus, a bacteria, a parasite. It could be a sliver. It could be dirt in a wound, right? It's the part of our body that's responsible for healing and defense. And it's incredibly complex. So there's aspects of it that are general and quick to respond, aspects that are specific and slower to respond. There's aspects that are controllers. So you can think of the immune system as being divided into 2 categories. The category that attacks, right? So they're responsible for identifying a foreign invader and going after them. And then there's the people who are holding the reins and going, hey, okay, this is great. there's this part of the immune system that's responsible for turning it off when the job's done and making sure that it doesn't get out of control. And so what happens in all chronic illness is that inflammation plays a role. Inflammation is the part of the immune system that's not specific. What happens in all chronic illness is you've got the inflammation's out of control, and that part of the immune system that's supposed to rein it in isn't working very well. The signals to keep the inflammation going are maybe higher than the regulatory arm of the immune system can actually keep up with. Also, the immune system is a huge nutrient hog. It uses nutrient resources like no other system in the body. And so when you're nutrient deficient, the first part of the immune system to break down is that regulatory arm. It's the part that reins everything in and turns the immune system off at the end. So what happens in autoimmune disease is instead of, or in addition to, that generalized inflammation being turned on and not being turned off, it's the specific part of the immune system that's turned on. And what happens is basically the immune system loses the ability to tell the difference between you and a foreign invader. So it doesn't know the difference between like my thyroid, because I have thyroid autoimmune disease, and a bacteria or a parasite or a virus. So it's treating my thyroid as a foreign object that must be destroyed. And then that regulatory arm of the immune system is also, right, not working, because this whole losing the ability to differentiate what's called self from non-self, right? So to differentiate a natural protein in your body from the protein in a bacterial cell wall, for example, that accident happens. That's a normal thing to have happen in the human body. But there's all these fail-safe mechanisms for the regulatory arm of the immune system to go, wait a minute, you're attacking us. So they can kill the cells that are doing that. They can basically make those cells dormant. They can increase regulatory cells to control all of the inflammation, right? They've got all these different ways that they can say, nope, that's not right, stop. So what happens in autoimmune disease, right? The regulatory arm of the immune system is not working well. So that fail-safe fails. So you get this accident that happens of, okay, wait, I'm going to start attacking thyroid tissue now. And then that part of the immune system that's supposed to rein that in stops working. And so what autoimmune disease is it's the immune system, which is supposed to protect us from foreign invaders, basically turning against us. It's like mass mutiny of the immune system and attacking our tissues as well. And what differentiates one autoimmune disease from another, what differentiates multiple sclerosis from Hashimoto's thyroiditis, from lupus, from rheumatoid arthritis, from psoriasis, is just the tissue that's being attacked. So it's exactly what protein the immune system is focusing in on as being the foreign invader.
Okay.
And so it's an entire huge range of classes of diseases. It affects somewhere between 50 and 60 million Americans, which is, by the way, double the number of people affected by cardiovascular disease and quadruple the number of people affected by cancer. And this class of 140-ish, probably more, autoimmune diseases, it's all about the immune system attacking a part of the human body, attacking part of our own bodies, and not being able to regulate itself. And the difference between those autoimmune diseases is just exactly where the immune system has focused its attack.
Okay, so whether it's Hashimoto's, arthritis, type 1 diabetes, celiac, any other autoimmune disease, lupus, it's the area of where it's being manifested. Yeah,
so the immune system is targeted with the use of antibodies. So antibodies recognize a very small section of a protein. So proteins are made of these like big, long chains of amino acids, and then they're folded amongst each other in like these really complex ways. So you can imagine like if you took a chain and just kind of wrapped it into a ball, you'd have little bits on the outside where you can see all the different links.
Right.
So it's those little areas where you can see all these different links that an antibody will attach to. And that's how the immune system, or the adaptive immune system, so this very specific part of the immune system, focuses its attacks, is with the use of antibodies. So you form antibodies against a protein, and in the human body, that protein can be found in one type of cell or in many types of cells. So some autoimmune diseases that attack multiple types of tissues, it's because it's a more general protein. And some types of autoimmune diseases will have more than one antibody associated with it. So for example, I know a lot about Hashimoto's thyroiditis because I have it. There's 2 antibodies that have been identified as being like the problem, like what's focusing the immune system on the thyroid gland: thyroid peroxidase, or TPO, and thyroglobulin. And you can have one of those antibodies, the other antibody, or you can have both. And what that really does is it tells you exactly where on the production of thyroid hormones your immune system is stopping that production. It can also tell you how aggressive the immune system is being. So if you have both of those antibodies, typically you've got a more aggressive disease that's destroying more thyroid tissue. And there's a lot of autoimmune diseases in which we haven't actually identified the antibodies that are responsible for that specific attack.
Okay. And one question floating around in my head when you're talking about autoimmune diseases and where they are in the body, do they spread at all? Can Hashimoto's go down to your gut and cause celiac? Or do they jump forms, or are they just specific locations?
So, yes, but not spreading. So what happens is that once the immune system has gotten dysfunctional to the point that an autoimmune disease can happen. So the regulatory arm of the immune system is completely not working. All you need to have happen to develop a secondary or tertiary autoimmune disease is another accident of having an antibody form that recognizes a different protein in the body that will focus the immune system on another part of the body. So they actually say that once you have an autoimmune disease, on average, you will develop a new autoimmune disease every 10 years.
Whoa, so it's pretty common to
So it's incredibly common. And what's interesting, because there's a genetic component to this. So there's no if you have this gene or this gene, you're doomed to have autoimmune disease. It just increases your susceptibility, and it makes it so that sort of diet inputs and lifestyle inputs and, toxin exposure and those types of things have a more likely to cause autoimmune disease than if you didn't have those genes.
Like family history plays into it.
Family history, because of this genetic susceptibility. Mm-hmm. Family history plays into it also because diet and lifestyle skills are often learned, right? Yeah. So we tend to eat the same way or similarly to how our parents eat. Mm-hmm. We tend to be roughly as active as our parents were active. So there's that extra component with autoimmune disease that comes from sort of its nature and nurture from a family perspective. But so what happens in autoimmune disease is you have, because of this genetic component, you have these autoimmune diseases that tend to go in pairs. Or tend to go in triplets. So you do see celiac and Hashimoto's disease fairly commonly together. So there's these ones that they tend to go together, and they tend to go together because of the genetic, the genes sort of predispose you to this kind of class of autoimmune diseases. And it's not, it's not a life sentence. Those are the ones you're going to get. If your mother had Hashis, you could, just as easily end up with ankylosing spondylitis, right? You could have something that's very, very different. But it's basically once the immune system breaks down, it's not working. And the opportunity for other tissues to be attacked is there.
Are these curable? If someone has a major autoimmune disease, let's just say Hashimoto's or celiac or lupus, can you cure them and totally get rid of them, or can you just minimize them and keep them somewhat dormant?
You cannot cure them.
Okay. So once you've got them, you've got them. What you can do is you can put it into remission. So remission means that you have zero symptoms. So it feels like a cure. Mm-hmm. And some people will actually, even separate of, paleo diet or autoimmune protocol, there's this history of people who will have a flare of an autoimmune disease for a few years, and then it will magically disappear and it will never come back. But they don't call that the disease was cured. They don't say the disease went away. They say the disease went into remission. And it's one thing that's really important for people who are making diet and lifestyle changes to address autoimmunity. So, following the autoimmune protocol, sleeping more, being active, spending time outside, right? Managing stress, that whole kit and caboodle that is targeting immune regulation and supporting this regulatory arm of the immune system, turning off this attacking arm of the immune system. It's important to understand that putting autoimmune diseases into remission is really common. Anecdotally, we're seeing this. There's only been a very, very small scale clinical trial using this approach in autoimmune disease patients so far. But anecdotally, from the tens of thousands of people who are doing this, remission is very common. Minimization of symptoms is extremely common. But
when you, all of a sudden, when you've been struggling with a disease, and these autoimmune diseases tend to be very, very invasive into our lives, the symptoms are awful. And there's certain symptoms that you see across most autoimmune diseases, like fatigue and trouble sleeping and aches and pains and mood issues and depression, right? These are things that just rob you of your joy of life.
Yeah.
So it's really important, like when you make these changes and like all of a sudden you feel amazing, it's so easy to say, I cured myself with food, right? It's so easy to say, this is a cure, because you feel great, your disease goes away. But it's really important to understand that it can come back, and it can come back unpredictably. So you can be continuing to do everything right, and something that you didn't have control over, like a cold virus or a hormone shift, right? Like, especially with women, our hormones have major shifts at different times in our lives, can stimulate a flare. And then it's a moving target. So then it's like, okay, well, I figured out the diet piece and the sleep piece and the stress piece. We'll now have to refigure out that whole thing in order to now incorporate the fact that my hormones are different, or incorporate the fact that I'm recovering from an infection. And so it can be really just emotionally challenging because of that. But it's still important to maintain that, like, we have this tool that is so much more powerful than any drug that has been developed so far for autoimmune disease, which is regulating the immune system with micronutrient sufficiency. So we're giving the immune system all the nutrients it actually needs to function properly. We are regulating hormones, which, all input into the immune system. We're addressing gut health, which inputs into the immune system. We're addressing mental health, which inputs into the immune system. We're addressing things like lymphatic flow with movement and, hormone regulation with activity. We're doing everything we can to make the immune system work properly. And those tools are lifelong tools. So challenges come, we've got this tool set that we can then apply. Okay. And it's pretty life-changing. And I've talked to people, the amount of time it takes people to actually see results on the autoimmune protocol varies dramatically. And it can go from 2 days to a year of persistence before you really start to see results, which is very, very frustrating for the people who it takes a year for. Usually when it's taking that long, it's because there's some lifestyle component that is really, really tough to prioritize.
What are some of the steps in the autoimmune protocol? Like how does it vary, and is it different than paleo at all?
Yeah, so it's based on a paleo template, but what it does is it has like a stricter cutoff when it comes to foods and evaluating whether or not a food should be part of the diet. So you could see any food as having a bunch of good stuff, right? Nutrients that are, useful for the body, and then maybe some bad stuff. So things that are inherently inflammatory. And, foods that are obvious, yes, have tons of good stuff and almost no bad stuff. And then foods that are obvious, no, right? Like grains and legumes like soy and peanuts are the other way, right? Lots of bad stuff, not much good stuff. But there's this whole range of gray in between. And a lot of these gray foods are part of the paleo diet. What happens with the autoimmune protocols, we go, no, we want to keep it here. So for example, tomatoes, nightshades, they have a lot of really great nutrients in them. So, and they have some great like antioxidants, right? Like lycopene, right? There's some amazing nutritive value to that entire class of vegetables, or I guess they're technically fruit. They're vegetable-like fruits. And they also have compounds in them that are inherently inflammatory. So they have compounds in them that act as adjuvants and can stimulate the immune system. So it happens in the standard paleo dieters go, okay, well, these foods are right here, but they've got nutritive value, so I'm going to include them.
Right.
What happens in the autoimmune protocol, you go, oh no, inherently inflammatory, I'm going to exclude them.
Okay.
So there's some extra exclusions based on that principle. And then
are those are those like the FODMAPs?
No, FODMAPs are not excluded on the autoimmune protocol by default. Okay. It's an extra complication that some people have to deal with who have severe gastrointestinal symptoms coming into it. So they would do like a FODMAP-free diet for 2 to 3 weeks and then slowly reintroduce FODMAPs. That's actually a really important like side science note, is that FODMAP sensitivity comes from a combination of not healthy cells that are lining the gut, so they can't handle the transport of fructose. So too much fructose is getting down into the large intestine, and then not having the right bacteria in our digestive tracts to break down those fibers and those polysaccharides effectively. So what you do is actually do a low FODMAP diet and give the gut an opportunity to heal, have a corrective influence to the bacteria in the digestive tract, and then you start slowly adding it back in, like teaspoon at a time type adding it back in, because those fibers are all really, really important for gut microbiome diversity. And what you do is by slowly adding them back in, you're then growing the right types of bacteria to help break them down. But they're slow; they tend to be slow growing bacteria, so that's why you do it very, very slowly. So it's one of those things people go on like a low FODMAP and they stay there, but that's not actually what the science supports. The science supports using it as a corrective, right? You spur on some gut healing, correct the gut microbiome, and then you start adding these foods back in. So the AIP doesn't start with low FODMAPs, except for people who are having severe gastrointestinal symptoms. And then for them, they would combine the two approaches. So a key aspect of the autoimmune protocol is basically flooding the body with micronutrients. So there's this extra focus that some shades of paleo have, but it's certainly not across the board, of eating frequently, daily, the most nutrient-dense foods available to us. So that's organ meat, which is why not all shades of paleo are on this bandwagon, seafood, which is a little bit easier for people to understand, and a lot of vegetables. So, it was Terry Wall's calculations for nutrient sufficiency for mitochondrial health that came up with 9 to 10 servings of vegetables a day. And, that's, when you look at it from micronutrients required by the immune system, that's like a really good target minimum. And so on the autoimmune protocol, it's not just about like cutting out nightshades and cutting out nuts and seeds and cutting out alcohol, right? These foods that we're going to take out because they can be inflammatory and can negatively impact the health of the gut. But then we also focus on tons of vegetables, seafood most days, organ meat 4 or 5 times a week, and really flooding our bodies with nutrients so that the immune system has the resources it needs to function normally.
What other resources do you use or follow for like autoimmune research and whatnot?
I am mostly getting my information from the scientific articles. So I call it the rabbit hole of PubMed. So what happens is, whether I'm writing a blog post or I'm writing, maybe a little Facebook post or I'm working on a chapter for a book, I'll have a topic and I'll want to read up the whole range of that topic. So I really understand the pros, the cons, the controversies, right? Like I really want to be able to present a balanced perspective. And then what happens is on PubMed is there's this little you might be interested in sidebar, right, of other research articles. And so sometimes I'll just end up on these complete tangents and I'll be like, oh, wait, that sounds interesting. Oh, wait,
I do want to research infrared saunas.
Yeah. Right. Well, sometimes it goes there. And sometimes some of the most insightful research is sort of found that way, not from a keyword search. So, I have there's some other leaders in this field who, like Terry Walls, whose information I think is fantastic. But for me, I'm always going to the source. So I'm always, right, if Terry Walls is saying something, I want to know the paper that she's quoting. And then I want to go read that paper and then read the papers that it cites and the papers that cite it and form this bigger picture in my brain. For me, it's really important because scientific literacy is such a huge component of everything that I do. And because presenting that balanced perspective, right, presenting that there's pros and cons, presenting the contradictory information, presenting that this is a complex topic and we don't know everything is really important for people to understand that paleo is dynamic. And it's the changes that we've seen in this community over the last 10 years reflects, sometimes it's just conversations. Hey, let's look at, whether or not potatoes really are inherently inflammatory or whether some people can tolerate them really well and whether or not they should have a place in this starting point of paleo, or if they're an add later food, or how we want to address this, right? So we've seen those types of conversations happen within the community. Sometimes that's because new science is being performed. Sometimes it's because it's more brains evaluating the science that's already been done. But for me, it's really important to be one of those brains that's looking at the full range of science and really communicating the details, right? Like I want people to understand that it's not a cut and dry issue with potatoes, that potatoes are one of these foods. And so whether or not you include them at the beginning of your diet really depends on your health history going in. And so for me, it's always about really pulling together research articles. And what's really interesting is these are research articles that often come from a lot of different fields. So the researchers that aren't necessarily going to the same conferences, they're not talking to each other. And within science, there's no like umbrella organization that looks at all the different science that's being done and kind of forms a big health picture. Nobody actually does that, which clearly we need. But the way science has developed, right, we were addressing the big questions. And then as we answered the big questions, we went to the smaller questions, and we break up these problems into smaller and smaller pieces to understand them in more and more detail. And then you have an entire lab of 12 researchers focused on this one little protein. And they are only looking at what that one protein does. And so you need someone who can take a step back and go, well, that protein also interacts with this protein, and these two things do these different things, and therefore you want both together or you want one or the other. Like, you need to have that perspective to take a big step back, which means a very, very broad scientific background, a lot of time to spend in PubMed, and the ability to remove yourself and remove, for me, it's challenging, right? Because I have what's worked for me personally. And then there's like what I can rationalize with science. It happens to be most of it, but not necessarily all of it. And so removing myself from, okay, yep, I know that, peas and green beans don't actually work for me personally. However, when you look at what might be inflammatory in them, they are a legume that's an exception. Right, they're a legume that really doesn't have anything. Once you cook them, there's nothing in there that's actually a problem. All the agglutinins are really easily deactivated by heat. So forming that picture for people, right? It's tough. It's tough because it's a lot of information to distill, and then that's still a lot of information for people to take in. But that's what I really consider my voice in this community to be.
The Paleo Mom, boys and girls. There she is. Sarah Ballantyne, thanks for coming on the show. The Paleo Approach is the book. You can get it on Amazon. Is it in stores?
It's everywhere. It's even in Costco.
Even in Costco. You heard it. Go get your 8-gallon thing of mayonnaise with pick up the Paleo Approach on the way. Mayonnaise
would not be AIP. Just throwing it out there.
Unacceptable. We'll get a box of the books. They probably sell them by the box.
Yeah.
Everything's bigger and better. All right, Sarah Ballantyne, thanks for coming on the show. You have your own podcast, correct?
I do, the Paleo View podcast with Stacey Toth of Paleo Parents.
Okay.
We are 3 years in, and we've never missed a week. So every week it comes out Thursday afternoons for subscribers on iTunes.
So is that 156 episodes about?
About there, yeah. 155, I think we're at. Yeah, it's, yeah. There's a lot to go through. Don't listen to the early stuff. We were not good. We were not good at the beginning.
Really? Yeah, I get that too a little bit. You want your latest work to always be improving, and so you're kind of almost embarrassed by the earlier stuff.
Yeah, but, I mean, if you want a good laugh,
what was bad about it? Was it just like finding your footing?
We were just really green. And so, and getting to know each other. So we're really good friends now. We can kind of have that like banter. But when we first started doing it, we hadn't met yet in person. We had just sort of had a few phone conversations, decided this would be a good idea. Yeah. So we were getting to know each other, getting to know each other's opinions. And for me, I was still at a point in my growth in the community where I was establishing my own voice and trying to figure out, where I fit. So if you want a really, really good laugh, go listen to the first time we had Mark Sisson on the show, because boy, was I nervous. And I was doing this like girl fan laugh, which most people who know me now can't even imagine me doing a girl fan laugh, but I was totally doing that. And it was super, super embarrassing. So if you want to start somewhere to see how terrible we were in the beginning, that's the episode.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you go from that, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm interviewing phase to the more professional, freak out, green.
To like, hey, this person's a colleague, and
let's have a conversation.
And it took me really feeling like I was one of those leadership voices in this community to feel like I didn't have to girl fan over the other leaders in the community.
Yeah, and you get better quality when you don't go it from like the fanboy, fangirl approach.
I had no control over it. This is the thing. That's just what was happening in my brain at the time. It was not a choice. I didn't even know it was going to happen until we were on air, and I found myself doing it. And so that's why it's good for a laugh. It's definitely good for a laugh. And then other than that, don't bother listening to the old episode.
Okay. Well, good place to start. That's the Paleo View podcast. And Sarah, thanks for coming on the show. Good stuff. Good conversation. Fascinating autoimmune diseases. They're a tough one, but lots of different ways you can approach them. And so glad to get your opinion.
Thank you for having me.